camera settings today because you're going to start using cameras soon. And the big part of camera settings I'm going to focus on for this is the exposure triangle, which you can go to any Google search and do exposure triangle and it'll bring it up. And that deals with your aperture, which is how open your lens is. So if you look at your lens um, and you stare into it, it'll open or close, so the hole will get bigger and smaller, and that lets more or less light in. So a wide open will have a lower F number, and it'll let more light in, and a closed lens will let less light in, and it'll be a higher F number. You've got your shutter speed, which is how long the light is allowed to come in. Um, and if you let the light in for less time, you will allow less light in, but you'll get a much sharper image. Whereas the more time you let the light in, the more likely you will get a blurry image, especially if there's motion. But it will make your picture brighter. And then ISO is how sensitive your camera is to light. And a lower ISO is less sensitive to the light, and you're going to get a sharper image, less grainy. Whereas if you have a higher ISO, you will start to get grain in your pictures. And unless that's the effect you're going for, most people do not care for grain. So looking at this, I've got two items here set up in a nice kind of way to show you depth of field. And we're just going to play with our settings here. So first off, we've got ISO. And like I said, our crispest footage is going to come when ISO is at 100. This is the crispest footage. There'll be the least amount of grain. It should look relatively sharp when we're actually filming. However, you're going to have problems because, as you can see by the histogram, we're all slammed into one side and then it drops off. It is very dark. My lighting is not set up for this. I could do something like I could pull my cell phone out maybe, and I could try to improve the lighting quickly. So I'm going to do that now. So if I added some lighting, I can add some effect, but for the most part, we really aren't going to get anything from that. So if I want a low ISO, I either have to drop my shutter speed, which will increase light. So I can drop my shutter speed, and if I'm shooting on a tripod like this, this works. Or I could drop my F number, which I can't right now. That lens is all the way open up because I'm zoomed in quite a bit. The problem with this is if I'm shooting something and I want it to be nice and crisp, is when I have my F value set up this way, although it's increased the light, if I bring my hand into the frame, you're going to see it gets very blurry very easily. Whereas if I increase this, although it'll be darker, my hand's not nearly as blurry. So to compensate for that, we have to raise our ISO. Now modern cameras, if they have a sensor that's APS-C, even micro four thirds, your ISO up to 1000 should be fine. I can get my hand in there, make it look, if I get it in the same depth of field as the camera, it should look nice and sharp. But coming back here, we get that separation. So I'm going to just boost this. I've got it locked off. So you see, if you let it go all the way up, I've got a line locked off at 32. You can see you will start to get a little bit more grain. If you look in here, you can see it. It's not too bad. But I'm raising this to show you the other thing. So we've done ISO, what it does. We've done shutter speed. You know, you can make it so if we raise the shutter speed a lot, it'll be very responsive. But now you're seeing the noise more. But very responsive as opposed to when we were down here. In this kind of range, very blurry. So if we raise the shutter speed up, which in general it should probably be, for what I have the camera set at, about 1/50, nice and sharp. What we can do is the last thing is with aperture, you can make it darker or lighter too. So right now, if I increase the F number, the aperture, let's see if I can do this. you do notice it gets darker, but if you'll notice in the back, the depth of field's getting smaller, and now look, both of my items are in focus. Although I've gotten darker, I'm going to drop my shutter speed because it is on a tripod, so we don't need it. Even though I have gotten a little further away, my depth of field changed. And you can see there's not as much separation between these two items. And that's just off of the aperture. Almost everything looks in focus now. So although it made it darker, we can do things like this when shooting landscapes. You're typically going to want a higher F value because it's going to create that separation at lower values, and you don't want that. So if we drop this back down and we increase the shutter speed, we get back to having the nice blurry cinematic looking background. So this is kind of how the exposure triangle works on your camera.